Hi guys, happy snow day. For those of you who got my text through Remind 101, I asked you to please read chapters 3 through 5 now. You were just supposed to read chapter 3 when you left yesterday, but because of the snow, I don't want us to get more behind, so I'm asking you to please read through chapter 5. It's not a whole lot. The book is easy reading. We're off for a couple days most likely, so I think you can do it. And after you read each chapter, I will have a video for each chapter to discuss. I will leave a place for you to comment. I do expect you to comment and participate and not just sit here and have this video going while you're doing something else. And so we're just going to push forward as best we can. So go ahead and grab your book. Before we discuss chapter 3, I want to discuss a few things at the end of chapter 2 that you were also supposed to read because we read about halfway through chapter 2 in class. So if you could turn to, in your book, to page 29, Paul, he says at one point, he kind of recognizes Kemrich's innocence and his childhood and that loss of childhood that we talked about on whatever yesterday was, Tuesday? Yesterday. And on page 29, Paul says, and I hope you caught this as you were reading, he says, I glanced at my boots. They are big and clumsy. The breeches are tucked into them, and standing up one looks well built and powerful in these great drain pipes, talking about his boots. But when we go bathing and strip, suddenly we have slender legs again and slight shoulders. We are no longer soldiers, but little more than boys. No one would believe we could carry packs. It is a strange moment when we stand naked. Then we become civilians and almost feel ourselves to be so. When bathing, Franz Kemrich looked as slight and frail as a child, and there he lays now. But why? The whole world ought to pass by his bed and say, that is Franz Kemrich. 19 and a half years old, he doesn't want to die. Let him not die. And Paul kind of picks up on that innocence. He says the uniform is what makes us strong and powerful and seem capable of this world, but strip us of that uniform, both physically, and I hope you kind of see that symbolic nature there. Take the soldier away from them, and they truly are just boys. Their bodies show that they are just boys. They're only 19 and a half years old. They don't have roots. They don't have things to hold them in place. They haven't experienced life yet. They were still in school before they left for the war. All they really cared about were their grades and passing their classes. And now, Kemrich suffers from an amputated leg. And, in a horrible conditions. It's not a nice, cozy hospital, and he didn't get a hero's welcome, and he, is not given the option of a lot of painkillers. He has to suffer in that hospital by himself without his family, and he's most likely not going to make it home. And we do know by the end of chapter 2 that Kemrich doesn't make it home. He dies. And Paul, he reacts kind of suddenly and takes off running out because, the orderlies at the hospital, they have to get Kemrich's body out and put with all the other bodies so they can have a bed for the next wounded person. And he takes off running, I think, just to kind of clear his head, and then he gets back and everything's back to normal. And at the end of the chapter, they have tea and rum. And, everything goes back to normal, and a classmate just died. But, think about and comment below why you think everything just kind of goes back to normal. Why don't they take a chance to mourn? Why don't they take a chance to remember Kemrich? Why do they, they sit down, they share their food, they have a smoke, and they have some tea and rum? Why is that the immediate response, or why is that how they react to their friend's death? Comment below. Take a look at chapter 3. At the beginning of chapter 3, new recruits are sent in, which is something very typical during World War I. Recruits were frequently sent, and the further into the war, the less trained the recruits became, because so many young men were dying at war, especially in the European countries. They could not get the men trained fast enough to replace those that had died. And so recruits constantly showed up. And the reinforcements or recruits arrive. And I think it's kind of ironic that Crop, one of Paul's friends, says, "Have you seen the infants?" And you remember that Paul and his friends are 18, 19, 20 years old, and they consider the recruits infants because to them they seem so young. And if you notice on page 35, he says, "We stroll past the horse boxes and go over to the reinforcements who are already being issued with gas masks and coffee." And, here's your coffee. Oh, and by the way, here's a gas mask. Hey, tell me why. We mentioned it briefly. We didn't talk a whole lot about it. But comment below, why did they need the gas mask? What was one of the war advances or advanced weaponry that they used in World War I that needed them to use the gas mask? Please comment below. So the recruits come, reinforcements, and they kind of laugh at them because they seem like infants. And then we learn a little bit more about Cat. Cat has this sixth sense to be able to find anything that they need, whether it be food or a place to sleep, and it just he seems to kind of pull out of thin air. If you remember from the book, they were stranded, or they wandered into this town that seemed desolate and didn't have anything, but they were able to find a place to sleep, and they kind of say, well, at least we have a warm place to sleep. It wasn't for the hunger. And so they kind of start preparing their own rations, but their rations are disgusting. And Cat says, wait here, I'll find us something. And he comes back with warm, freshly baked bread and fresh horse meat. And for a lot of you, this will freak you out, but they ate what they could, so don't be grossed out by it. It was something to eat. And that was Cat. Give him an hour or two, and he'd come back with a feast for you. And I think Paul really admires Cat for those qualities. And at one point, on page 40, they start talking about the war itself. And you start to kind of hear their opinion of the war, their opinion of their involvement in the war. Cat sits down after they said they had just had an hour of saluting drill. I mean, imagine an hour when you have to salute properly. And it seems ridiculous to us, too, because we know that they are fighting on the front lines, or that they are men fighting on the front lines, and then those who are a few miles behind the front lines are having drills on how to salute properly. And what good is being able to salute properly going to do you in the long run, or on the front lines? But they had just had an hour saluting drill, and Cat says, "You can take it from me. We are losing the war because we can salute too well." Obviously, he's being sarcastic, but he does have a point. They're spending all their time on these kind of silly drills when they need to learn better how to survive on the front line. And then Crop, Cat kind of takes it light. He says, "Give them all the same grub and all the same pay, and the war will be over and done in a day." But Crop, on the other hand, kind of thinks things through, and his idea of solving the war and ending the war is just to get, almost treat it like a public event, like a gladiators event, or some type of fight, and sell tickets and have entrance fees and have this big arena, and then get all of the generals and ministers of the two countries in the arena and give them clubs and let them beat it out. And whatever country your man won, his country won the war. Because in the end of that statement, he says it would be much simpler and more just than the arrangement they're in, because the arrangement they're in, all the wrong people are doing the fighting, meaning that all the soldiers, they, especially those who were drafted, they don't really even understand what they're fighting for anymore. They're just fighting because they're being told to fight, and they're dying because they're being told it's honorable. And he says, you know what, the solution is just let all those who actually care, the generals and the ministers, who started the war in the first place, let them deck it out in an arena, and we can all shout and cheer and wish them luck. Is his attitude towards it. Also in chapter 3, they discuss some of their times in training, or I guess in boot camp, and we learn a little bit about Himmelstas. Himmelstas is a really cruel man, their commander during their training. And they talk about this idea that, especially in the army, one man must always have power over another. And that's, it's kind of one of those, the army is one of the only places where you can get away with beating someone over the head because they did something you told them not to do, or they didn't do something you told them to. And at one point on page 44, they say, and the more insignificant a man has been in civil life, the worse it takes him. And so meaning, the less power a man had before the war, the worse he handles being given power in the war. So you take someone like Himmelstas, who we learn was just a postman before the war. You give him power, and he becomes one of the most cruel men, or most cruel men in the war, treating by how he treats his men, or I guess the most cruel commander in the war. And then at the end, other kind of discussion about Himmelstas, Tajden comes running up, and he's super, super excited because Himmelstas is coming to the front. And why do you think this excites them? There is a reason. And they hold a lot of bitterness towards Himmelstas. So comment below, why are they so excited if they dislike him so much? Why would they want him in such close quarters with them? He is coming to join their company at the front, and they're excited. It seems a little odd. And they tell us, or Paul tells us about revenge that they took on Himmelstas at one point. Tell me below, what was it that Himmelstas did specifically to Tajden that causes Tajden to have such bitter feelings towards Himmelstas? Himmelstas just was very, very cruel, especially to Tajden. And then they get the revenge. They kind of plan out this attack on Himmelstas. After a big celebration, Himmelstas comes out of a bar. This was during their training days, not while they're in the front. Himmelstas comes out of the bar. They throw a sheet over him and literally beat the crap out of him to where he almost can't walk. And the other men, the other commanders, they treat Paul and his friends like heroes because of the way that they stood up to Himmelstas. Even the other commanders recognize Himmelstas and his cruelty towards his men. That's kind of all that happened in chapter 3. But if you look at the very last page, page 50, after Paul tells us the story about how they treated Himmelstas, someone describes them, or Paul tells us that someone described Paul and his friends as young heroes. In this book, I feel like that is an oxymoron, and it's kind of a paradox as well, because does Paul view himself as a hero? And not in this, humble, modest way, I'm not a hero, but even Remarque, the author of our book, does he view these men as heroes? Tell me below what you think. How is that idea, young heroes, in this book particular, not in real life, but in this book particular, how is that idea of young heroes an oxymoron or a paradox, especially with the ideas and the views shown to us in this book? Check out, once you finish reading chapter 4, check out a video on chapter 4, and I'll have chapter 5 posted as well. And I hope you stay safe and warm, and please do not judge me on these videos. I know I went over 15 minutes. I'll try to keep the other ones shorter. Don't judge me. I am really not good at this video thing, but we've got to try. So enjoy your afternoon and check out the next video.